Alex Guglielmo and I, Joseph Frank, did a book analysis on the book The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway.
Hemingway's novel takes place after the First World War, also known as The Lost Generation. He opens his novel with the protagonist, Jake Barnes, describing the life of Robert Cohen. Cohen was a Jewish man who often felt uncomfortable in his life due to his background. For example, at Princeton University, he was always mocked for his Jewish background.
Now leading to the protagonist, Jake Barnes, we're just going to talk a little bit about his. He took part in World War I, which we'll say how that led to his meeting of Lady Brett Ashley. That would affect the relationship later on in the book. But for Barnes, he fought in the war and was injured, and due to his injury, he did have to get assistance in nursing. After the war, he wasn't seen also as like a heroic character, more so as like a damaged, wounded warrior. He was faced with both physical as well as mental pain. Mentally, he could not like hold like a relationship for say. Like he had an affair with Lady Brett Ashley. His love interest never really came around because he saw it was pointless. The same with Lady Brett Ashley. Actually, she was the nurse who assisted him when he was in the war, and that's how they first met. She later would go on to have other affairs because she also didn't find it really important to have a love interest because the future was really hard to hold and like to keep a promise for, because I guess it would just never really work out the way they wanted it to. She would have the interest with Mike Campbell, who we'll discuss shortly, and throughout the book it's basically just them trying to get through life with hard relationships and living everyday life in Paris while they're not really sure what life has for them.
Throughout the novel, Jake and his friends, such as Mike, Bill, and Robert Cohen, travel to different cities and countries to escape the realities they are facing, especially following the First World War I. The First World War, where they're often faced with hopelessness and loss. On the journeys, they face different situations, such as bullfighting, drinking at bars, and violence even, which shows their inability to adapt to their life following the war. For example, Lady Brett Ashley and Jake often are in love with each other but are unable to manage a relationship due to their mental state following the war.
So, more on the whole Brett love affairs, because she's not able to sustain a relationship. Brett, throughout the novel, not only did she fall in love with Mike, she had other affairs such as Mike Campbell, Romero, who was a bullfighter who she met in Spain, even though she only saw him for a brief amount of time. She found a quality that I guess she thought fit her best, maybe one that drew her closer to him, that she thought was like a grave connection between them. Like for example, she brought characters towards her. I guess that's what Hemingway wanted to show, that constant love affairs occurred between people. I mean, Mike fell in love with her. He didn't have much wealth. I guess there was a quality that she was really drawn towards. She even had a relationship with Robert Cohen. He was very defensive of her and always wanted her back, leading to violence being shown through the novel, which could also show post-war violence, trauma, characters going against the unnatural just so they can get something they desire because it was so hard for them to capture. And then leading towards the end of the book, when she's with Jake Barnes alone in the taxi, she says that wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be great, like to have a future? Like it would have been nice. And then Jake replies, "It would be pretty to think so." Just showing that they all realize that although they have love affairs and although they have interest towards each other, nothing's really going to bring them together. because the thought of a future together seems pointless.
A major theme found within Hemingway's novel is the action of bullfighting, which is taking place in Spain. In the fights, men put their lives at risk through the values of loyalty, honor, and bravery to eventually kill the bull. However, this is greater than the actual literal meaning of it. For example, Robert Cohen was a man who greatly disliked the bullfighters. He found it unappealing, but in reality, he was often looking up to them because he thought they were serving a main purpose in their life. For example, they trained their whole life just to be able to kill the bull, which gives them great honor and recognition by everyone. However, Robert Cohen, on the other hand, was not really, he doesn't really have a point in his life following the war. He thinks that they just live their lives, not to the fullest, where they often find themselves drinking, violence, to fill their lost life. Which ties into another theme of Hemingway's, which is the constant reliance on alcohol to appease the problems in their lives. For example, many times in the novel, Hemingway shows the characters going to bars almost every single night to just have a good time, which they feel is a good life for them. However, in reality, they know that their life is really not going in the right direction because this constant reliance on alcohol is pushing them further and further away from what they truly need in life. This alcoholism often ends in violence, which is seen in the novel when Robert Cohen is filled with emotion due to his love with Lady Brett Ashley, and his jealousy, which revolves around Pedro Romero, who was at the time dating Brett, and he actually beats up Jake, which is his true friend, because this emotion is he's just filled with rage due to this, and he ends up beating up Pedro Romero and Jake.
Okay, so just touching a little bit more on like violence as well as alcohol. After the war, which Mike as well took part in, it led to a lot of people having a lack of motivation to continue on with their careers and their lives. For example, Mike, who didn't have a profession, had no money, was living off money from his family, his parents, as well as the generosity of his friends. And with the little money that he received and got, he spent it all towards alcohol, which is the theme that we touched upon. He wasted away his life because there was no purpose. There was no point of doing anything with their lives. So on Hemingway's style of writing, he tends to use common diction and straight to the point text, which isn't necessarily bad. He gets the point right to readers. It's common straight to the point dialogue as well. It's from the current events that are occurring throughout the novel. Like, let's say Paris, he had their personal conversations, which were also revolved around Barnes's personal thoughts and opinions, because it was a first-person narrative in his own words. And although we do see that it's first person, we know very little about Jake's personal state. Even though we hear his personal thoughts, we're left to think more about other characters like Lady Brett Ashley, Mike, as well as Robert Cohen, and what they believe towards certain situations that take place in the novel.
Overall, we found the book The Sun Also Rises to be very interesting, as it describes in detail the lives of characters following the First World War and how they had to adapt to their new life, especially with their feelings of hopelessness and loss from the war. We see how their inner emotions were drastically damaged and how they had to overcome these in order to hopefully push back to a normal life. However, others may not find the novel to be as interesting, as it lacks really a big climax, which often attracts readers to a novel. However, the detailed storyline really seems appealing to readers.
Thank you for watching our presentation on The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway.
Hope you enjoyed.